2.5 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the conflict still has no end in sight. The fighting has destroyed cities, communities, and taken thousands of innocent lives. While the war appears to be focused on territory, it is also a battle for hearts and minds. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has claimed Ukrainians share a common identity with Russia, and that Ukraine, in its present-day form, is an artificial state. How has that narrative affected how Ukrainians see themselves? Volodymyr Yermolenko is a Ukrainian philosopher and author who says it has strengthened a Ukrainian identity that embraces European values and increasingly sees itself as part of the family of European nations. On this episode of the InnerView, I'll talk to Yermolenko about the ongoing conflict and the role Ukrainian identity is playing in fueling the country's resistance. And Volodymyr Yermolenko joins us now on the InnerView. Good to have you on the program, sir. You're a man of many titles. You're a professor of political science, a lecturer, a journalist, a philosopher. Which one best describes you, especially in the current context of what's been happening in your country in the past couple of years?
Philosopher, that's the best description. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be with you.
So, when we look at this philosophically, what is Ukraine fighting for? Is it fighting for liberalism? If not, what is it?
I would not say it's fighting for liberalism. I would say that it's fighting for the right to be on our land, the masters on our land. It's fighting for independence. It's fighting for sovereignty. And of course, it's fighting for certain values that Ukrainian society was cherishing since many, many centuries. And these are the values primarily of freedom, of capacity for self-organization. The second thing is obviously for us is that Russia is an empire. There is a long history of Russian imperialism, which dates for many centuries. And Ukraine has been one of the key things that was an obstacle for Russian imperialism. And Russians were trying to destroy Ukrainian identity since 17th, 18th century, and they partially succeeded at that time. But Ukrainians managed to keep themselves, to keep our identity. And finally, this is the time for us to limit substantially the Russian imperialism.
Do you think the Russians have been quite successful in arguing the exact opposite, that they are fighting a US-dominated imperialism and Ukraine is the front line of that war?
Yes, I know this story, but the problem is that, well, the Western partners of Ukraine have been quite reluctant to accept that Ukraine is part of the West. And it was a long story of Ukrainian insistence that we belong to Europe, we belong to the Western world. And I would say this is rather the fight of Ukrainians to prove for Europeans, for example, that our place is with the family of European nations, and rather the reluctance of Europeans to accept it for long decades. So it's rather the story of Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian fight for something better for us than it is a story of, Americans coming to Ukraine or Europeans coming to Ukraine and using it against Russia.
Is there an element of Ukrainian identity being constructed in the face of Russian opposition in terms of not only about what Ukraine is, but also what Ukraine is not, in opposition to what Russia wants to impose?
Well, every identity is constructed in a way with regard to its opposite. Every identity is a kind of a mixture between what you have inside you and how you relate to others. And of course, for Ukrainians, currently Russia is imagined as a very much hierarchical state, imperial state, in which the emperor, the Tsar, is everything and everybody else is nothing. And this is not a society in which we want to live in. We want to live in a society where the ruler is just, well, probably the first among the equals. So it's rather the idea of republic, respublika, which has a long story for Ukrainian history, the history of Ukraine being rather connected with Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which was called Respublika in the 16th, 17th century. And in a way, this fight is an attempt to to restore this idea, this republican idea, freedom-based idea in Eastern Europe.
Do you think they underestimated Ukraine after early 2022? I mean, we're seeing recently Ukraine even crossing the border into Russian territory, conducting attacks. It has F-16s now from its Western partners. Do you think that they felt they could sort this out and wrap it up very quickly?
Absolutely, Russians underestimated Ukrainians. The problem is that there is a danger that Ukrainians and other partners of Ukraine underestimate Russia, and this is something we should not accept. We should really be very careful about it. Russia is still a very powerful state, which has a very strong army, which doesn't really care about the lives of its soldiers, which learns fast, which adapts fast, which is using increasingly modern technologies, including Chinese technologies. And I think we should be very, very careful, and not only Ukraine, but all the Ukrainian partners. So for me, this is the war not for territories. It's not that Russia wants some Ukrainian territories. It doesn't care about these territories. These territories change nothing in the large geography of the Russian state. For me, it's a question whether Russia will be able to maintain or strengthen its empire in the 21st century, and whether the 21st century will be a century of re-imperialization of the world. So the 20th century, the last decades of the 20th century, was rather the century of de-imperialization of the world, a certain decolonization. Of course, it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but we see that the world is really becoming more and more multipolar, in which mid-sized states also play a role, in which small states also play a role. I don't think this is a world which Russia wants. Russia really wants a world of great powers.
When the world changed during World War I or World War II, borders changed. In order to get some semblance of peace, is there a possibility that the Ukrainian people will accept that the borders will change and the Russians keep some of what they took?
Well, look, this is a question that many people are asking, but the implications of this question are much more widespread. So by asking this question, we're actually asking whether we agree that in the world of the 20th century, the borders will be changed by violence, and whether one state, and primarily the permanent member of the Security Council, a nuclear state, can violently change the borders of another state. If we accept that, then we are moving in the world which is very dangerous to live in, because other states will do the same, and we will have a situation of increasing number of conflicts everywhere in the world. If Russia is permitted to do that, why other countries are not permitted to do that? That will be the question many people will ask, many countries will ask. So I do think that the restoring of Ukrainian territorial integrity is an interest of all, and on all continents, in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, wherever we live in.
You said that the Russians are not afraid to lose soldiers or lose the lives of their people. There is an attritional aspect to this war over the past couple of years. Help us understand the mindset on both sides, also from the Ukrainian sense. How far are the Ukrainian people willing to go, and how long are they willing to see this last in order to gain victory in however they define victory?
I will not lie to you. I will not say that Ukrainians are capable of doing it forever. Of course, we are living creatures. We are people from flesh and blood, and people get exhausted from this war. I mean, I'm going very often to the frontline areas. I see how the frontline areas are living. We're going through destroyed villages, damaged cities, and of course it's very difficult. So I think it's in the interest of all good-willing people to not only stop this war, but stop this war in a just way, in a way, as I said previously, that does not encourage other dictators to change the borders of other countries. You can see that despite the very difficult situation on the front line, Ukraine is now trying to retake the initiative, strategic initiative, and this also shows the mindset of Ukrainians. So Ukrainians understand that this is a war of attrition, as you rightly said. And in this war of attrition, nobody knows who will be exhausted first, because obviously Russia is a very powerful country with huge resources. Ukraine is backed by bigger number of allies. So it's a big question who will be exhausted first. But the strength of Putin, I think, is that he was always a master of the unpredictable. And Ukrainians are trying to beat him on this territory, to be the masters of the unpredictable now.
As far as I understand, Kiev is relatively safe or stable, but for sporadic violence. How often do you go to the front lines, and how would you compare the two?
I will not say that Kiev is safe. I'm living in Kiev suburb, which is called Brovary, and last night we had huge attack. So we literally heard huge explosions near our house, as if a missile just was exploded above our heads. And this is the reality in which we're living. And in the morning, we learned that the Russian missiles just landed not far away from our town and killed people, including one child. So it's never safe. You probably heard that Russians recently, 2 months ago, attacked the biggest children's hospital in Kiev. And this is a very dear place for me because my school is just across the road. I was going to that school for 10 years. They also hit a maternity house, killing several people. And this is a maternity house, and the hospital in it is a place where I bring my father quite often, because it's near the place where my father and mother lives. So it's not a safe place.
My apologies. The word relatively was doing heavy lifting there in my question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Kiev is a vibrant place, so it's not empty, and it's really vibrant. And there are lots of people and lots of cars and traffic jams. So it's a kind of this strange contradiction that you can actually live under the bombs, but still live a relatively normal life. When you go to Kharkiv, for example, the second largest city in Ukraine, the second largest after the occupation of Donetsk, which was the second largest, it's 40 kilometers from the Russian border, and it is shelled almost every day by missiles, which are very, very difficult to intercept because they fly in 30 seconds or 1 minute. And still, Kharkiv has a vibrant cultural life and one of the key capitals of Ukrainian culture. So, it's always a question of living despite these problems and living despite the danger of being killed. And it's always a question that life is still so strong that it can assert itself against this danger of being exterminated.
Is it clear to you that Ukraine needs more help from its allies?
Absolutely, not only more help, but smarter help, because this war is a war of technologies, and everybody should also understand that. It's a war increasingly going to the skies. This is also a tragic paradox of this war, because the skies for us human beings is a nice thing, and people who believe in God believe that God and angels are in the skies. Now we have rockets falling from the sky, so it's another tragic element of this war. But it's increasingly going to the skies. It's increasingly going to the drone battles. It's increasingly going to the questions of artificial intelligence and distant action. And in this way, of course, the question is who will be faster in this technological adaptation? Will it be Ukrainians or will it be Russians? What will be the role of China in its technology? What will be the role of Ukrainian partners in Europe, in Asia, elsewhere?
Do you accept the argument from the West, particularly when they say that a technological or military escalation, giving too much help to Ukraine, triggers a possible direct war with Russia among and between nuclear powers, and that's why they're cautious and that's why they're afraid? So they want to help without overly helping.
I think it leads us nowhere right now because we see that, for example, the war technological solutions that could have been given to Ukraine, which could have helped Ukraine to win faster, to regain territories. For example, if the tanks that we received from Europeans or Americans arrived not in 2023 but in 2022, it's quite possible that Ukraine would have already proceeded to the south and probably to Crimea. So I think the delays in this help are not leading us to avoid the Third World War. I think they're leading us more to this Third World War scenario because, I mean, imagine Russia is winning in Ukraine. It will mean that it understands that, it can proceed further. Let's be honest, its major dream is to get revenge for what it perceives as defeat in the Cold War. And the Russians were saying it very clearly in 2021 that they actually want a new security order in Europe where the European security will be based not only on NATO but also on Russian forces, meaning the restoration of the Warsaw Pact. So you can imagine what their ambitions are. And that means that we cannot, in their minds, we cannot exclude their willingness to confront a NATO member, be it an Eastern European state, be it Turkey, or be it some other state. So the only thing to stop it is actually to show to Russians that they cannot really win in Ukraine, and they should really rethink their way of seeing the world and stop their imperial ambitions.
Going back to the war of narratives, circling back to the Russian story, they say we do respect sovereignty and we don't want to do this, but not only are we fighting Western imperialism, we're also on a mission of denazification. And I'm really looking forward to you addressing this for us, because I want to dwell on this for a couple of minutes. Is there a germ of truth that they are exploiting, or is it fundamentally false in your opinion?
No, it's fundamentally false because Nazism is an ideology. By the way, you showed to your viewers my book Liquid Ideologies, which I published in Ukrainian, and I really studied fascism and Nazism very deeply and their historical roots. So Nazism is essentially an ideology of course, racial extermination, but an ideology which is based upon the idea that the citizen is nothing and the totalitarian state is everything, and fascism is even more. What Ukraine has been in the past decades, it has been a democracy which was changing its leaders in free and fair elections, which had a quite a chaotic and sometimes anarchic, in a good sense of the term, politics. Which had multiple points of power, which was increasingly decentralized, and different cities, not only Kiev, playing an important role, which had a progress towards, giving more rights to different groups, which had a progress towards emancipation of different groups, more rights to women, and all this stuff. And, when Russians are saying that Ukrainians are Nazis, they're just twisting this reality, because the truth is that Russia is increasingly going to a totalitarian state where basically the ruler decides everything. Putin is now deciding everything, even concerning his close circle. And this is clearly a Führer state, if I can say so, a state which is led by a leader which doesn't care about parliament, which doesn't care about freedom of press, etc. So it's a kind of a schizophrenic, really, depiction when you are a fascist state, meaning Russia, and you're saying everybody who is against you is actually a fascist state.
Let me ask you this from a slightly different angle and just go slightly deeper before we move on. So it's objectively clear that Ukraine is not a fascist Nazi state, but when we see the headlines of guys like Kapustin, who the Germans consider one of the foremost neo-Nazis in Russia, fighting on behalf of Ukraine, or the Azov Brigade in the initial years that had neo-Nazis among them, to the extent that the Americans cut off support and banned them, and then eventually said, okay, they're well integrated enough now to be non-Nazi, right, or supported. To that extent, tell me, how prevalent is that element within the Ukrainian fight against Russia?
To answer the question, we need to go to the Ukrainian parliamentary and presidential election before the full-scale invasion and see how much the nationalist parties took in the polling. And we will see that they are completely marginal. So in the last parliamentary elections, the nationalist parties got, I think, about 2% of the votes, if I'm not mistaken. Compare this to what we might call neo-fascist parties in Europe, where in Germany or in France, people can get 15%, 20%, 30%. So this shows you, of course, far-right elements are present in every society, especially now where it is so easy to amplify their ideology in internet. But then you will see that they're really having little influence on the way how the society works and how politics works. And again, let me repeat that the key question is not whether you can find some people with certain ideologies, or you can find swastikas on graffiti in the city, which probably drawn by some unknown people. The key question is whether this ideology is transformed into the functioning of the state machine. And this is what is going in Russia. Let's be honest about this. It's not fascist in the term of Mussolini probably, but it's increasingly fascist in the term of Stalinism. So it tries to repeat Stalinism. It makes Stalinism as a kind of a cult hero. And Ukrainian society, contrary to this, and despite the war, and this is probably one of the miracles of the society. Of course, it's very anti-Russian, it's obvious, but about any other element of the fascist politics, meaning the, going against minorities, going against liberal ideas, going against freedom of press, it's not there. It's not present even during the war.
I appreciate you giving me your thoughts on that. Before we wrap up, can the world handle two major conflicts at the same time? February 2022, major focus on Ukraine after the Russian invasion. October 7th, 2023, things change. In Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, war rages in Gaza. Do you feel from the media, from the politicians, that the sort of attention has been split? Or do you feel that it has only, on the other side of this, further emphasized what you've been saying about Ukraine all along?
Look, of course, the attention span is very changing, and I think Ukrainians perfectly know about this since already 2014. So in 2014, I remember taking part in the discussions somewhere in Europe in 2016, 2017 under the title of Forgotten War. Is it a forgotten war in eastern Ukraine? So my response will be that we cannot really forget this war, and the world cannot really forget this war because, again, if Russia wins, that will mean the complete change of the international order. And maybe somebody is willing to do that, is willing to have another international order, and I perfectly understand these people because the current international order is very much dominated by the West, and we need to change it. Obviously, we need to change the United Nations Security Council. Why these 5 countries are having permanent seats there, nobody understands, right? But the problem is that destruction of the political order, international order, this is what Russia wants, will be much worse than even existing the political order, international order, because it will mean that the borders of the states will not be protected by anybody, by the UN Charter or by some other things.
Volodymyr Yermolenko, unfortunately, we're out of time. We covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us on the interview.
Thank you very much.
Take care.